My name is Jennifer Tegenya. Today is February 22nd, and I am conducting an interview with Ruby as part of the Chicago Youth Movement's Oral History Project. Thank you so much, Ruby, for taking the time to meet with me. Do I have the permission to record this interview?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So Ruby, let's just start out with you telling me a bit about your childhood and your family.
Yeah, so I actually have three older sisters. I was born in Evanston technically, but raised in Chicago my whole life and Rogers Park. For a while I was in Humboldt Park during the pandemic. When I was little, I also moved into Maywood, Illinois, which is like outside in the suburbs kind of. I grew up only with my mom, and she raised me and my three sisters on her own. So it was a lot of moving back and forth to different places and trying to secure housing. I was raised by my sisters mostly too because my mom was always working and attended Chicago public schools my whole life and currently studying in the school in my neighborhood. So I go to Loyola. But yeah, that's kind of how I grew up.
Yeah. So I guess tell me a bit more about the neighborhoods. You mentioned Rogers Park, Humboldt Park, kind of the different neighborhoods you lived in and like the different relationships you had with people, places, and institutions in those neighborhoods.
So Rogers Park is where I lived most of my life. Definitely somewhere that I've come to love, and not just because I was able to always like be around in the neighborhood, but also a lot of the people that I went to school with lived in the neighborhood. So I grew up with them and got to know them through high school because I also attended a community high school. And I guess there, like with institutions, I mean, it's the north side, so definitely more relaxed and stuff like the police. But for like the school that I went to, you could see that it wasn't funded as much because of the population that was attending it, because Sullivan is mostly refugee students and Black and brown students. And it's not like a selective enrollment high school in Chicago. Humboldt Park was mostly like a rush kind of move because it had gotten expensive to live. So I had to move in with my older sister. And it was like, you couldn't really go outside sometimes just because, you know, people always talking about like violence on the streets, but it was mostly just like constant policing and shot spotters around everywhere. And it just wasn't like, there wasn't any parks, there wasn't really any like open community spaces for people to actually like go out. So in those 2 years that I lived there, I spent most of my time actually inside of the house. Never really got to interact with the neighborhood or like the people living in there. So definitely more connected to Rogers Park and the people who are living here. And also just like a lot of organizers that I know also live in Rogers Park. So it's just the place where I feel more at home.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. You mentioned Sullivan and like that school community also being integral to like your relationships and experience of the neighborhoods and while you were growing up. Could you, I guess, like speak a bit more about like your educational journey in general? So like elementary school before you got to Sullivan, and what those environments were like for you.
So um elementary school, I went to because we had moved to Maywood when I was like starting kindergarten. So I went there from kindergarten to second grade. And Maywood's actually like a predominantly Black neighborhood. So I was, I think, maybe one of the only kids who wasn't Black in my school. So the education that I received there was very different from in other schools. But it was mostly just like the history being taught because a lot of my teachers are Black. So I had like a different relationship with them, but also different like side of history being taught, even though I wasn't like there from like kindergarten to second grade. Very different from when I came over here and I attended Newfield Elementary School, which is kind of a K-5 class. I mean school. There I got put into the gifted program, which I kind of didn't like because it ripped me away from all of my friends that I had made in my classroom and kind of shoved me into like a fully English classroom, which I did not really enjoy. And since that was like a K-5 school, you could test into one of the like fancy elementary schools like Inter-American, Greenlee, But my mom did not let me take the test, so I did not go to one of those schools. So then I ended up going to Kilmer Elementary School, which is right next to Sullivan High School. There, I just met a lot of different people. A lot of the teachers are very caring. That's where like I really got to meet people who came from like different backgrounds, not just racially, but also in the way that we've come to this country. Because Kilmer, like Sullivan, had lots of refugee students. So for me in Roach, I was exposed to like people who had different backgrounds and different perceptions of this country growing up. And then in elementary school around 8th grade, I think they had just launched Go CPS, which is basically where you can apply as an 8th grader to go to a different high school than the one in your neighborhood. And basically the whole point is like all the fancy schools are like really funded. So you got to test into them. And if you don't want to go to, I guess, to a less funded school, you got to go through that testing process. So I fed into it and I was like, I'm going to Lane Tech, which is one of the selective schools. I tested for the whole day. I made it in. And I was like, great, this is awesome. Like, I'm a good dude with stuff. Within the first 2 weeks, I transferred out because I was scared for one, because it was a completely different environment from where I had grown up in. I was going to school in a predominantly white place. And I was like, these people are not poor like me, or like if there are poor people, they aren't like showing it, I guess. I had friends who like had houses, and I was like, I'm like apartment, and like people whose parents had different professions. And at that time, it was kind of something that I was like, oh, I'm ashamed of it because my mom was in dry cleaners. So it isn't seen as like great or like the same background as other students. So I just had a really hard time adjusting. And within the first 2 weeks, like just the constant testing and like quizzes, and then also just having to buy new school supplies, like a graphing calculator was expected from each one of us. New gym attire, like it. And I think the fee for the school yearly was $385. And I was just like, I can't do this. And my commute was also like 2 hours by train and bus. So I transferred into Sullivan High School, which was really known as the bad high school since it was right across, and it had been known for a lot of like gang violence, but also people were like, it's not a good performing school, you shouldn't go there if you want to have a future. That's where most of my friends who didn't apply to other schools went to. So going back there, I was welcomed a lot, which I was like, yay, because I got to be with the people who I grew up with. Since I was the only one who went from Lane Tech. Went to Lane Tech from elementary school. And I got welcomed a lot. But I did notice like immediately how the academics changed and how much slower it went. Also how little we had compared to Lane Tech, because Lane Tech has like the pool, the aquaponics lab. They have the whole like 3D printing lab. They have a school newspaper. Their halls are nice. Everybody has a nice locker. While my school has had a broken pool for like almost a decade, I would say, because we don't have enough money to fix it. We had like some heaters in the school that were like broken. We had leaking walls, and there I was just like, wow, like why is this going on? I was like, do we really deserve this little? And I talked to some teachers about it because really the only options we had were like either you take honors and you guys are like the nice kids or like the smart kids, and like regulars was just for the kids who teachers wanted to just push through the system, and then they like were over the kid, you graduated by. And I kept asking like, why is it like happening like this? But also why don't we have like any resources pertaining to students, like what we're doing? Like I couldn't really put a label to anything that was going on in the school, but I just knew that it was like wrong and that something needed to be changed. And that kind of changed it in like our one year, because we got a new teacher, Miss COVID, and she was from Philadelphia, and she had worked like in a project-based school environment. And she came in and she taught us English and social studies at the same time. At first we were like, this woman's crazy, because she had to sit in circles every day. And she was teaching us about different things, and she really pushed us to like think deeply about systemic racism. Like she made us do the 1619 project, but instead adapt it into our own school and neighborhoods, and especially why does our school look the way it does, because it's not like it's just like, oh, we always so in like, let's just give them less money. It definitely ties into like having low test scores, but also like just like where our school stands academically, then that also comes from like a racist test system, like the SAT. It's like we have so many refugee students and students who are like going through this, like why are we using SAT scores to evaluate students at our schools? Like, is that really what success looks like? Is test scores what success looks like? Is going to college what success looks like for everybody? Because that's really one of the driving factors, especially for counselors that could see. And then after high school, definitely had a different perspective of education as a whole, especially going into college. I remember my last semester, I did not want to go to college. I was like, I'm over it. What does it mean to like continue to participate in an institution that wasn't built for people like me? Like, do I really want to be here? And now, attending Loyola, it's been really hard because it's a private institution with lots of white people. So it's definitely like different backgrounds collided with me. But now that I'm older, I have like better skills to like manage it, but also to know that I'm not the problem. Because I think that's really what I felt in eighth grade, that I was just like dumb, stupid, like I should have had this all prepared beforehand, but now it's definitely different.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing those different and very insightful experiences. Um, I'm curious, I guess, like for during your time in Sullivan, you like explained that there are a lot of like refugee immigrant students in the school. I'm curious like what the dynamics were within like between students in that space. And if you could talk a bit more about also like other interactions with teachers and generally what the school culture and community look like.
Yeah, so Sullivan is like a really small school. I think we're like right now about like 600 students. So definitely there's a lot of people who knew each other beforehand at definitely elementary schools. But we also had a really huge populations of students from the south side coming up to the north side to come to Sullivan. Um, and as far as I can speak for like the English language learners community slash the refugee population, there is actually like a pretty big issue. I would say that students and teachers are still trying to gap up about kind of like separating students within the school, because English language learner students, yes, they don't know English and maybe their English level isn't up to where I guess the state wants it to be, but it becomes to the point where they're trying to do all of these interventions to help them, that they're completely separated from the rest of the student population, which has really left a lot of students feeling isolated, but also a lot of students questioning like, we're celebrating all these cultures, but like we don't get to interact with different people. But from having lots of refugee students, there's definitely been like a huge boost in the amount of aid that goes around in the school, especially like organizations coming in and giving food to students. And like, I think they have a free store also, and that became a resource that was like prioritized for refugee students, but became available to all students. So I think there was definitely a big understanding around that. And I think like tensions within the school really came from students kind of pushing back sometimes on the principal, because we had a principal before, Chad Thomas, and he was very like, just to put it in simple words, he was kind of like, I saved these kids. And like I'm doing them such a great favor by being this white man who's always bragging about how diverse high school is, but his policies and like kind of what he pushed forward was kind of a we are all one, and like kind of ignoring the different strengths, but also like struggles that certain groups had in the school in a way that was like, as long as we keep on saying that we're a community, we're going to do great, which a lot of educators disagreed with, but also me as a student, like sometimes I found myself questioning like what supports are going around for students, but also like what are we doing? Because having two completely like separated student groups is unfair to both students, but also puts out a message about who deserves to be separated from like the rest of the group. And as far as my like experiences with teachers, growing up, I've always talked a lot to my teachers because I've always wanted to know more about certain things. But I've always been interested in like the inequalities in the world and why they happen. But I never really had a deep understanding, I guess, about it being like a bigger scale thing rather than just me like individual events. So in my sophomore year, I really got like invested, and then after that, I think it was like the Chicago Teachers Union started, and that's where I started getting more invested in it. I was on the picket lines with teachers every day, and just like trying, like getting into like that action and getting into that mindset of like we got to do something if we want to like start something or like stop something from happening. That's where I really got to know some of my teachers and kind of like what they were fighting for and kind of how that brought them into like the union organizing space. But I also met teachers who were kind of like, like teachers who like crossed the picket lines and trying to see like where they were coming from. And that's where I decided to start like a social justice club at my school, because I was like, there's students who care about this, because I wasn't the only student out there. And I was like, maybe we just need a space to talk about it. That way we can do something. So I created that space with one other classmate, and we had launched it. We didn't really get that much reception at the beginning, maybe like one or two people who were interested. But at that time, to be honest, it was very like the way we advertised it was kind of just by asking questions, which I don't think now was like is racism bad? Like that was kind of the tagline. And I don't think that was like very much like what people would want to come into, because that sets up very much like an argument, which it's not. And then Chicago Teachers Union strike happened 3 weeks. We came back, we started doing it, and then COVID hit. So then we were like completely like what do we do? So 2020 we were completely off, and then in 2021 the teacher that I had started doing it with reached out to me. She was like, do you have the capacity to continue running this club? Because in summer 2020 a lot of things happened, so maybe that in 2021 it was kind of like everybody had that to their intention, and there was some people who really wanted to speak about it. So we decided to open up that space again, and then we got a few more people, but it was mostly like we couldn't really do anything like action based. So we were just mostly discussing things going on around the world, and also like going on in our own lives. And we started like really different folks, and just to see how like all of this impacts us, but also others. And then to kind of rewind a bit, during summer 2020, CPS gave schools the option of their local school councils to vote out cops in their schools. They call them SROs, which is school resource officers, but basically cops in schools. And during that time, there's really like two teachers who were at Sullivan who like were really against and really openly against the policing of students. And it was just a really hard conversation to have at our school, because the majority of the teachers at our school were white, and some of the more conservative leaning folks in our school were Black. So it was like trying to open up a dialogue that was like understanding, but also like really hitting like the nail on the head, like of why police shouldn't be in schools, and why like the money that goes towards them is better spent somewhere else. So during that time, we organized, and like I organized with like 2 to 3 other students. We made up our testimonials. We held like a town hall for these students to tell them like what we thought, but also hear from them like if they had any concerns, but also present them with research. And during that time, we got like a lot of student feedback, because I had a lot of classmates who like knew me, and like a lot of us know each other just because we're such a small school. So it's like I see you every single day, like we know each other on like social media. So it was easy to bring people in, and like for some people it was like their first time, so they were kind of unsure, but it was like, just let me know what you want to say and I'll relay it for you. So during those meetings, it was kind of hard to see some of the adults in your life who you think were there, like really understanding you, to see that they were kind of on the opposite side. Because I had a math teacher who I got really like along with, like I really respected him. And then to hear him at the meeting say that he was scared of the students really changed my perspective, because most people, when they hear like cops out of schools, like a lot of people usually bring up like, oh, well, there's school shootings, this and that. But for someone to just come in and say like, oh, I'm scared of the students are the threat, rather than like someone from outside, that's where I was really like, oh, like this is like an issue. And this is even more why we don't need police in schools, especially in like city schools, because even conversations that I have now, because I'm an education student, I have lots of my peers talk about how they had problems in their schools because they were scared for their lives about a school shooting. But for a lot of us who have grown up in the city and have attended CPS schools, it's always been these kids can't act well. These kids are violent. These kids are the problem. We need a way to control that. And the only solution we have is police. So luckily, our school still had a restorative justice model, which they were like, we're going to repair the harm, but they never really like, yeah, a lot of people are like talking about restorative justice in a way that's very reactive. That's like only after the harm is done, we're going to restore the relationships we had with people. But sometimes it's like the relationship never has even existed because there's not been care in the school building, but also people haven't interacted with each other, but also the conditions under which the harm has been caused has been addressed. So that was my main point for talking about, like, if we're going to call ourselves the restorative justice school and the principal is going to pride himself on it, talking to the news about it, then we actually need to show that we're committed to this. Because if you're adding police into the school and saying like restorative justice is our model, those two do not add up and they do not work hand in hand with each other. And so that's where I really got involved with like my work and making sure that I wanted to move forward and be in these spaces of organizing, because I had also talked to Lynn Young, who organizes the Southside Together, Organizing for Power, and she came in and gave like a really good talk to all of us, and like she was just amazing, and like just having that support from like her, but other students, and just like working all together to get this, we were able to successfully remove the 2 SROs we had, and that was like a very nice moment because it was like yay. But at the same time, it was a different turn for us because after that, the 3 students who organized for it, we were constantly just emailed by the principal, like, you took them out. Now you're the one who's going to fix whatever happens after this. Because afterwards we had to create a safety plan for the school. And it was kind of tasked on us, like, you're going to come up with what goes in the safety plan, since he had so much to say about it. And in one way, we were like, okay, yes, because we want a student voice on this. But at the same time, it was like, you're also like the principal of the school. Like, you need to be in these meetings and like actually have this mindset to go into it. But those have mainly been like how I've interacted in school with people, but also like with the policing systems in schools.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And that's also like very interesting to hear in terms of like COVID, right? And so I'm curious if you could like recall the first I guess like the first few like actions or meetings that you were having that had to do with the SRO issue, right? And kind of what that looked like initially.
Yeah, so initially it was just like kind of like a long email thread that I was like put onto, where like different teachers and staff and students were kind of like just emailing about on this issue. Then it turned into a group chat, and then it turned into like, you guys need to organize if we really want this to go through. So the first few like Google like meets were like kind of just like, what is our goal and how are we going to tackle it? And then from there, we realized that a lot of the conversations were becoming very like adult-led, because it was mostly staff. So they kind of had their own way that they were going to organize, especially with being in a union and what that entails for them and like their job at the school. So then for students, it was kind of a time for us to like kind of just break out into our own meetings and hold our own meetings where we were like, hey, what are we going to do? How are we going to plan this? But at the same time, a lot of us never had experience with organizing before, like in a very like formal setting. So we did invite like 2 adults to come in just to help us facilitate those meetings. And in there, it was really just a lot of people like storytelling about like their own experiences with the police, especially since this happened from I think around May to around like August. So a lot of the people who had been organizing with us were also like very traumatized from what happened in May, and someone had went out to go protest and they had had things done to them by police officers. So it was really just an open space for people to share their experiences, also for a way to see how we could use those experiences to move forward, to make sure that like police are out of the schools.
Yeah.
But also it was just like a lot of people would drop out too because they're like, you know what, this is too much. I can't handle it. Or like after meetings, so we kind of did like the first two meetings really fast because we had just found out about it, and the LSC really isn't the most visible thing in the school saying like, here's our Zoom, like join this. We never really advertise it, and like because it usually happens during the school day, so a lot of students never even attend those meetings. But after some of the meetings, after some of the backlash that students had received, there was a lot of like, I don't have the capacity for this, I don't deserve to be taught to this, which is totally valid. So it was a lot of us just like trying to support each other and me to the ones who did want to continue with this work, like how can we support you now, even though we can't be the ones to be speaking anymore? Because a lot of students didn't like harsh criticism, because a lot of our security guards were part-time police officers, and they kind of brought in what they wanted to say to students, especially since it wasn't a lot of people, because of the Zoom format. It was so easy to throw such like jarring words at other people because they knew they wouldn't really have to deal with that afterwards, but also in a way remove their job title from them since they were just on Zoom, and kind of like 2020 shut down like everybody, like nobody was teaching that year, nobody was doing their job that year. So they kind of took it as a like, we're just like normal people these years, not kind of keeping in mind the relationships they had with these students or that students would see them at.
Yeah. And I guess I'm curious, like what during these Zoom meetings and the organizing, was it local to students from Sullivan or was it a citywide situation?
I'm sorry, you cut off during like the second half of your question.
You're good. I was just asking if the organizing meetings that you were attending, especially at the start of the movement, if they were citywide or if they were localized with Sullivan, because I know you mentioned like LSC stuff, which would be for Sullivan only. So I'm curious, like, what the larger Cops Out CPS meetings were like.
Yeah, so um they had reached out to us through Ling Young, since a lot of the people that had been doing that organizing had been doing No Cop Academy organizing beforehand. And they definitely were like a network of support, and they always told us to contact them. So we did have a few meetings with them. But kind of what we realized throughout it is that in a way, Sylvan was being impacted with this issue. But a lot of the students who were part of like the bigger organizing across the city were really students from the south and west sides of Chicago. So kind of the framing was very different from ours, but also like kind of I guess the implications of it, because it's very different if we remove police officers from a school in the north side and how that's going to be framed versus like students removing it in the south side, but also the types of like arguments that we've received from other people. Because sadly a lot of people in the neighborhood were like, well, we live in the north side, like we need to do it, like it isn't towards you or whatever. It really was. So we did do some of that, but most of our meetings are really local and just trying to keep it within so especially because we like kind of have like personal relationships with some of these people. So it was way easier to like kind of have and initiate these conversations
Yeah.
that we didn't need to. But like at the same time, we were also like, if we take out schools, I mean police officers from our schools, like that contributes to the bigger movement of removing police officers from all schools.
Okay. That makes sense. I guess I'm curious, you mentioned earlier the meeting where your math teacher kind of talked about not feeling safe, and that was kind of his reasoning for supporting SROs remaining in schools. I'm curious if you had other instances in these meetings and your actions that surprised you or caught you off guard.
Yeah, so that was one of like the big ones, but also another one was a student was giving a testimonial about what happened on a day that she was protesting with for Black Lives Matter downtown, and that happened to be the day where they brought the bridges up and they basically like trapped people downtown. And she was telling about how a police officer had ripped her shirt and had like basically beaten her up, and how she was like even seeing a police officer or seeing the uniform of a police officer like scares him. And one of the security guards told her that it was because she had a smart mouth, and that if she thinks that he deserves to get bricks thrown at him. And from there, he like just invalidated her feelings, had completely spoken out of line because it also wasn't even his turn to speak, and kind of just ignored the real issue at hand. And I think she was 16 years old. And from there, it was just like mass chaos of people like trying to like calm down the situation, but also how do you calm down the situation on Zoom and like just trying to figure out what goes on. And also there was like that person, that security guard will always just come in and speak and always just add in like but statements like, oh, but this and it totally came from like the place that he was a police officer. So that was one of the um instances specifically from that case. But further on, like we started organizing once we got back in person too, because policing was one thing, but also just policing within schools and like how that happens at our school because we have like what do we have? We have metal detectors and then we have to scan our book bags. We only have one entrance. We can't bring in our water bottles into school without emptying them in the front fountain. What else? There's like a lot of things that go on in that school. The bathrooms were always locked. You had to ask for an adult to open it if you wanted to use the bathroom. And it was just stuff like that that always got to us, but also like the way that some teachers are like, well, yeah, you need that because otherwise we can't trust you. And it was always this whole thing of like, we don't trust you, we don't trust you, like you guys are young, so you don't know yet. Or just this framing of trying to be like, well, we're protecting you guys, because if you guys don't receive these harsh punishments now, then what about later?
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. And did you feel like, could you talk about the LSC vote that ultimately removed SROs from Sullivan and how that vote changed or did not change these experiences that are happening in Sullivan that have to do with policing and restriction of students?
Yes, sure. Can I just move so I can like turn on this sensor? Okay, so that day with the LSC vote, it was really really nerve-wracking. One, because a lot of schools had been like deciding on it, and we saw that a lot of schools had like not succeeded in getting SROs out of their school. So from one, that was really nerve-wracking. Second, I think the day before the vote began, we realized and we had heard that the LSC did not have their paperwork done well. So there were some members who were not there, who weren't supposed to be there, who did not have the paperwork to be there, and then like just this whole thing went out. So it ended up being that each LSC member gave a recommendation to the principal. So it all ultimately just fell on the principal saying yes or no. So we had a hearing that day. I remember I spoke for 3 minutes and some other people had spoken. And from there, it really was just like, what is he going to decide? And when he had said yes, we're going to get rid of them, that was like a huge success for us. But from there was like, where are we going to go with this? And then because we really we hadn't been in the school building for so long, they never really touched upon it again until I think the end of my junior year, where they started emailing us and they're like, come join these Zoom meetings, even though they were kind of during our school time. And they were trying to discuss I'm sorry, did you say something?
School meetings for what?
Zoom meetings for this committee, a safety committee that they had put together, and they're like, we really want student voice, like you two are like representatives for like the students. And I was just I was like, yeah, I worked on this, but also there's like a lot of other students that were interested in this. And like speaking for myself, I wasn't one of the students who was getting targeted by the police or like had teachers who were coming at me all the time. I'm like, so you need to you can't be selective in whose student voice you want to take in. And that's what I think happened a lot during that time, especially with them talking about we have student voice with two student representatives on the council and it's COVID. And I didn't really have any connections with my other students. We weren't really talking. We were all locked up in our rooms trying to get work done. So those meetings were very unproductive because we had adults who were like here and there, trying to figure out what to do with other stuff, but couldn't fully commit to being in the safety things. They
Mm,
shared us on a Google document that was the school safety plan, and there we were just like, what do we put in? We tried asking them, but they weren't really like answering us. They were just like, tell us what you think, and it was very pressuring because it's like we're in a meeting with like 10 other adults, and they're asking us what do we think, and then from that they're gonna decide if they want to put that in there, if they don't want to put that in there. But also, if we would bring up ideas like, hey, we have an unused room that used to be called the peace room that hasn't been used all this time, like why don't we use that as an actual place to like resolve conflicts and like have students have a break room because they might be feeling like overstimulated or like overwhelmed with emotions. And it would always just be like, no, we can't do that. Or, we don't have the money for that. Or I don't have the power to do that. That was the principal's favorite. I don't have the power to do that. And I remember in one of the meetings, I told him, well, who has the power to do that then? Give me their email and I'll send them an email. And he said he would, but he never did. And it was just like a lot of, there was just no commitment to it. And then we got back into school, I would say 2021, yeah. And from there, it was just like they never brought it up again.
mm,
It was kind of like you guys are starting fresh, so we're going to throw away like everything that happened in this past year and ignore the fact that like we need a new safety plan, but also we need to commit to like actual safety instead of just like punishing students and making students feel safe within the school and feel like they can like do things and express themselves in school. Um, but like from that, it was just like really hard to get meet into meetings with the principal. One, because like I feel like this is so true for every school, but the principals are never there. They're always in outside meetings, and then trying to get meetings with the vice principal is hard. The dean of students was also hard because then we didn't have a dean of students, and it was just like there's supposed to be all these positions in schools, but either we don't have them or they're not here because they're filling in the roles for other things.
mm,
So from there, it was just like, well, what can we do to get their attention if they keep ignoring us? And one main thing we had was like creating safety, but then one of like the immediate things that popped up was them locking bathrooms because they said students would fight, and we're like, why are you guys even like policing students more and saying like we can't do this and that? So we really had to do a lot of kind of like attacking the principal in order to be able to get their attention to talk about like, hey, what does safety look like
yeah.
and how are we going to create it in our school, and how does that not involve controlling what students do at every moment that they are in this building. Like so
Yeah.
during report card pickup, we set we had like some people standing outside the building with postcards that said, it was just some artwork that said like, why are they locking the bathrooms? And then on the back, it had a thing saying that it's unacceptable to lock the bathrooms and that they were peer guardian. So we had like parents sign them, and I think we got like 30, which was pretty good. And we showed them to the principal, and at that time, we were also going through a principal change because our old principal had left to go higher up in CPS, and we got an intern principal, and we got sent like a very angry email saying that we were spreading around false information and that they would set up a meeting with us, which was always very like, it was always very reactive, but also set up to just be at the end of their work day, and they wouldn't really listen. They'd just be there like, I'm tired, you guys, let's make this quick.
Mhm. That's very interesting to hear. You mentioned earlier restorative justice and the approach that the school was trying to make with that. What did relationship building look like in those spaces? Um, yeah.
Yeah, so the peace room, really, when I got there my freshman year was really the last year that it was used because we used to have a partnership with this group. I think their name's Moja, and they used to be the ones to run the peace circle. And then all of a sudden, like it started not being staffed the room. And it would, I think my senior year, I found out that we only had a person on Tuesdays and Thursdays for maybe like 2 hours each day. And I was just like, conflict is not selective. It's not going to happen on a Tuesday just because there's someone on the peace room on Tuesday. So there was really no relationship building that went on in the peace room. I remember one time I got into a conflict with another student, and teachers had tried to facilitate some sort of restorative type of thing, but it really didn't work out. One, because like the space was not welcoming, and then it was very hostile. And also like it's it's just a place to be. It's just like this is a separate place aside from the hallway where you can be when there's conflict. It really wasn't intentional in wanting to like get people like things to move on, but also like try to prevent it in the future. Like what do we both need so that this doesn't happen in the future? And it didn't show much care because I feel like it's a process that you go through after conflict happens. It does not get resolved in one sitting. And I think that's a lot of what the school did. We're going to do it in one sitting, but also like a lot of the restorative justice really wasn't going on even before that room was not staffed. It was really just used as a space for someone to be in from like a different place to just sit down for a while. And there was two students who had a conflict, just to sit them down and be like, you both know this is wrong. Okay, now hug it out and like give each other a handshake and you all both are fine. Like go back and you guys made peace. And I feel like that was just not the way to go. And I don't think that's really restorative justice. And I don't think it really shows care for the students.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Within the few students at Sullivan that you were organizing alongside, what did the dynamic between you guys look like? What kind of relationships existed? And what kind of learning did you feel like you did in that work and space?
So I think almost like Zoom, we were like kind of connected. Like I know what you're talking about. Like I totally relate to you, but we didn't really have a deep person connection with each other just because of the fact that we just saw each other through Zoom, but also because at that time I think I was like a junior, so it was just juniors and sophomores since I didn't know really any upperclassmen, but also nobody else knew. The freshmen were eighth graders, so like they knew no one coming into the school. So then we came into in person, and in person it was just completely different because we got to see each other. We got to understand the people who were like behind like the little Google icons, and we really got to like be in community with each other because we were really like relationship building, like because we understood that that was like such a hectic year, and even coming back to school could have people feeling some emotions. So we wanted to make sure that we made the space open to people, like hearing about people's like what's going on in people's lives, because we would always open up with roses and thorns. So like, what's one good thing that's going on? What's one thing that isn't as good as you would hope for it to be? But we would also throw in like a silly question because at the end of the day, we're all young people who just want to live like kind of a normal life. I think that's a lot of what came up. A lot of us don't want to have to worry about these issues. We don't want to have to think about like why are all of these things happening to us. We want to just be able to enjoy things and have fun. And I think in a way we tried to foster a community where it was like, yes, we're doing this work and we're looking towards this, and like we all like love and care for each other. And that's why we're going to like enjoy the community that we're in and like, try to bring in others. Because we ended up having very like solid relationships with each other. We would say hi to each other all the time. We would like even plan for events at the end of the school year just for us to like make sure that we're taking care of ourselves. Because we always said like if you're like tired, like and just don't have to like don't come, like it's fine, like you need to take care of yourself too. And I found that a lot of us were having like friendships with people who weren't in the same grade levels as us, and like actually thinking like, are you doing fine? Like I want to like help you, we want to help each other. And like it was a very good community that we had, that even now I'm still talking to some of the members about people wanting to join in because they were like, this is a nice space within the school that I think is pretty different from your like other clubs, because you're talking about issues but you're really exploring who you are and what you care for and what you want to do about the things that you care for. And I think that a lot of people, what we got from this was like learning a lot of the terminology behind a lot of the issues that we were seeing, and learning from other organizers, because we had worked with Americans Friends Service Committee, which is like a Quaker organization, but they're an abolitionist space. And we did a collab with them and we got different organizations from across Chicago that would youth led to like talk to us about their campaigns. And then we started like forming connections with people. Like I started talking to some people and other people were like, I'm interested in this. Like I want to continue like looking at stuff this. And we're thinking about how we could apply it to our own skills. So in those ways, people are learning about like this is work that we're doing in our school, but this is also work that's going on every year towards like a goal of the future that we want.
Yeah, that's beautiful to hear. Could you say more about Lynn? You've mentioned a couple of times, and the organization that they worked from, and maybe like an example of a time that you remember learning something or having an interaction with them or other people in that organization.
Yeah, so I met Lane, I think it was really the cops at CPS that I had met them. And then I think I saw them like maybe 1 or 2 more times, but like I really just admired her work that she had done because she has always done things around policing in her community, but also like policing in schools. And like she came to us and started speaking about her own story and how organizing at her school had gone. And from there, like really what hit me for her is that she was one of the clips that she said, like she said, if someone tells you no, you tell them no back. Cause she said that like in school, growing up in school, like a lot of people didn't take her seriously, but like she would always stand up for herself and she knew what she was doing was right. And that's what moved her forward. And from there, I think that's something that really impacted me in the work I do because there's a lot of people who will try to like minimize the work that you're doing or don't believe in the work that you're doing. But at the end of the day, as long as you know what you're doing and like also have the power to communicate through, but also knowing that no is not the final answer. Because I think a lot of people, if you hear no, you think that's when you should stop, but that's really not when you should stop. I think that's a signal to just even push harder. But that's really the amount of like organizing I got to learn from her and something I really value.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And obviously, I think that idea of perseverance is very like evident in the work that you continue to do after COVID, right? And after the shadows were removed, still trying to continue. That work is very like inspirational, I think. Could you talk a bit, I guess, now about the impact that you feel like all of this organizing had on your politics and like how you understood like city officials, school administrators, and people in power?
I think for me, a lot of this book has taught me about how little I was aware of a lot of things going on. Because I feel like before I really just had this perception of it's me. That's all I really need to know to keep moving forward. Like I don't need to know about other things. And I feel like learning about learning about politicians, especially about the elder people in Chicago, is really that's something that stuck with me until this year when I did some more organizing with young people and learning like who these people are. And I feel like it really just influenced me to like I need to be where the people are and what the people want to fight for. Like that's where I'm always going to be, and I'm always going to be where I see something unjust. And just it pushed me to learn more about like officials, but also about the ways that we interact with officials and the ways that we can be present in making sure that there's change. Because I feel like a lot of people don't interact with their elder people. Not that's not their fault at all because people have so many things to do. So interacting with like a public official definitely is probably not many people's priorities, but also understanding the amount of power that these people have over the city and making sure that we use that to our advantage. Because if we don't use it, they're going to use it for their own purposes.
Yeah.
So it really influenced me to start learning about these things, but also learning about how these meetings function and what happens afterwards, and learning about the mayor, because Chicago is very much a mayor-run city. So doesn't really matter what happens outside and the rest of the world. What really matters is what's happening in the city. So it's really influenced me to learn about these people and like learn about new campaigns running, especially in this year that there's like elections, but also about other people because I forgot to mention, but I live technically in West Ridge now, which is like right next to Rogers Park. And learning about like the politicians in that area, but also learning about the history of where we're living and the history of like why certain places are the way they are, and just like learning about the past and like trying to change the future based off of that. Because I think I saw a lot of that with Rogers Park, learning about our past, but also realizing that some of the things I have seen growing up, such as like the gentrification and displacement of so many immigrant people, and how that has impacted what it looks like now. And even like the institution that I'm attending, which has contributed to that.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting you bring up. And um, do you feel like in addition to changing how you understand your neighborhood, and its history and its future, that activism changed the way you relate to other people, in your school or in those neighborhoods as well, or your family?
think I think it really has because in my experience organizing, I've met people from like various backgrounds, but also people from various backgrounds about how they came to these organizing spaces and what really influenced them to be in these spaces. Because some people came from like reading books, some people came from personal experience, and some people it came from like maybe initially being on like I guess the opposite end of what the organization stands for. And I think for me, I think especially when I was really getting into stuff like social justice, I was really like nitpicking my mom and my family a lot about like, why don't you care about this? And like I really wasn't thinking about like how their past have influenced what they think about now. Because sometimes I would ask my mom, like, why don't you care about this? Why don't you do this? And for her, she really was like, I don't think you an explanation, which I think was an appropriate answer to give. But then like just going through and seeing like all the systems that are like in place, but also just seeing where she came from. Because my mom, she's left Mexico when she was 15 years old. She's undocumented. She hasn't been back home ever since, and seeing the ways that that influences the way that she thinks about this country, but also the amount of disconnection she has from this country and how she doesn't really care about anything about it. One, because she can't vote, but second, she spends most of her time working
Yeah.
and being exploited by this. So it can like turn into a moment of numbness, which I think a lot of organizers sometimes feel very discouraged by, because sometimes it could be like some of the students in my class who were like always being like monitored by the police officers. I'd be like, well, why don't you care about this? Like you're being impacted by this. But understanding people who have developed a numbness to us because they've always experienced this, or it's always going to be that way, no matter if you change it or not. And trying to understand people who come from that point, but also understanding, I guess, the people that I don't agree with. Not saying that I'm going to give them like be like, oh, we can disagree and like still be friends, because no, but I think sometimes it's important to listen to just so that you know how to move forward from it. And also it can be a very important time to hear the opposition in order to clarify and make sure which demands you want to push forward even more or want to clarify them.
Yeah. So I'm curious, you're doing a lot of organizing around education structures and also policing structures and the intersections of those two things in the city, while still being a student in a CPS school, right? And while still being a Chicago resident that is also being policed, right? In the city. I'm curious how you felt your organizing impacted the way you even related to school. Um, and then we can also get to how you felt like you related to policing structures after that.
I think really to schools, I think for a while I was very um I was just like, I don't want to participate in school anymore. Like I see the value in education, but not necessarily the education system that we have right now and the way that it's put in. Because I think because I did some political education for a while, and I found that that was really a nice time to like interact with people and to learn from other people and to share knowledge as a community. But I felt like school was not that place for me, and I felt that the intersections between school, police, and different systems was too much to the point that I felt like school was becoming a policing system in its own way and resembling other places. So for a while, I felt really disconnected from school, and sometimes I even still do today because I'm like, why, like, why would I be here even if I know that this is like a really hard place to be in? But sometimes I find the value in it, but sometimes it's really hard just to hear things and to be in it, but also to see like some of the blameless that goes into the school system and like testing and all of those things and just navigating applying to colleges and all of that. And it really made me feel like I couldn't be in the school building, but it was really the moments where I felt like I wanted to be in school, and it was really like the community, the clubs that I was in, that I was like I feel connected to this place and I could be in this place. And I guess for me, like education has been such an important part of my life that I want to be in it, but also like change the way that it is, because that's why I decided to study education. And I think for me, it's like I want to be here, but I definitely see the issues with it. And I want to carry in my experience into it so that I can kind of change the way that it goes, because schools are always going to be here. And making sure that I can spread the knowledge that I have learned from others, but also when I come to Loyola, so a lot of the teachers that we do observations, a lot of teachers that we have here have lots of misconceptions about the students, and sadly believe some of them. So using like what I know to combat those, to try to understand, because some of these teachers are going to be teaching students like me in the future, and trying to see if I can change that.
Yeah. Before I ask you about your relationship with policing structures, I'm curious if you could talk a bit about interacting with, you said earlier, like students were even more policed, right? And harassed by different officials in the school building, not joining you in that work, or maybe not understanding it. Is there an experience that comes to mind, or what are things that you've kind of found help you navigate that frustration?
I think for me, like there's students who are constantly police and then harass and then students. I figured out that some students believe those things about themselves after a while, which is really where I was like, instead of like asking why, maybe I should listen first of all, because I feel like a lot of the times we can tend to like want to immediately respond to what someone says instead of just listen. So I think for me, it really taught me that I should just listen instead of like really assume like just because you're not involved with this doesn't mean like means that you don't care. So I think for some of the students, I heard a lot of like, well, I am this way, like I deserve it because do you not see everyone else around here? And for me, when I was just like, wow, this is like really the impact that education is having on people and like the messages that we are sending out. And second one just taught me like to think about like different people have come in, because even though I have my like own way that I've come into this experience, my way isn't the only way that people have been, and people come in for like many different reasons, and people disagree for many reasons. So I think for us, when having conversations with people, instead of having my goal as you to like join us in that moment, I know that some people aren't ready for it or don't necessarily have the energy or time or want to do it. Simply, the biggest concern for me was like people believe these things about themselves, and how can I direct them to like know that this is not like that they don't deserve, like nobody deserves to be constantly policed, and trying to like direct them in a way that's just like, oh, like really, like this is like what I think, but not necessarily make them feel like they have to change it just because I'm saying something to them.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Um, Looking back at the different interactions you had within the school building and also outside of it, how do you feel like your organizing changed the relationship you have to different policing structures?
For me, I mean, growing up very young, I had very early like interaction with the police system. It was part of the reason why my mom became a single mother. And during that time, huge trauma had been done, like really huge, to a point that we moved back over here, and it was just like, first of all, a very terrible time for my whole family. Also for me, like growing up and understanding, because I think I was like maybe, yeah, I was like in second grade when I had the board here. And like during that time I really didn't like realize anything, but growing up now, like through the organizing lens has really made me go back and think about those times when I was younger, because we had to move out of our house in 24 hours and we even come back pack a new life over here. But during that time, did the police give us any resources other than giving us a ride back home from the police station? No, it was just you need to do this, that, and then like thinking about how like cruel the system is, not only towards people who have been like convicted of crimes, but also towards like people who have been victims of such big harms. Like it doesn't provide resources for either party, and it doesn't really help anyone move forward. If anything, it continues to drag back people back to where they were at, and really repeats the cycle over and over again. It's because it's not like police systems or prisons do it.
Yeah.
And for me, through the organizing, I was like, one has helped me process like things that happened in my childhood, but even now has made me see how policing is really present in everyone's lives, but like really present in the lives of Black and brown people, and like how we have always been conditioned to thinking that surveillance is okay and the surveillance is what's going to keep us safe, when it really isn't something that's going to keep us safe. It's going to be something that someone else may use. Like I remember finding out about ShotSpotter and like the ways that microphones are placed around the city was predominantly Black and brown neighborhoods. And living in Humboldt Park, right across the street, we had a ShotSpotter. And I remember sometimes with the Citizens app, they say like there's like a gun shooter or whatever. Sometimes it would say that, and it was like across the house, and I was like, there's no shooting happening in front of the house. And just seeing the, I guess, absurdities, but also realizing how policing manifests itself in like lots of people's lives, because policing is also the immigration system and the Department of Homeland Security. It's also things that have killed people, especially people who were close to my mom, and like with immigration, like also policing of the border, policing of everything, and how policing is really used to separate people, but also put people against each other, because
Yeah.
police are such like a big topic, and many people have different interactions with it. And it's always like come back to policing, like every single issue, almost every single issue I see in my community, or like I've heard other people talk about, has always been because of policing, and like policing bringing out these narratives that we are not safe, that we are a community with each other, that we can't be safe if we don't have someone constantly surveilling us with the threat of being arrested.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that, and even, being able to relate your personal experiences to what drives your work, I think is awesome. And like, even I think the point that you made of a lot of issues tend to always come down to like policing, and this idea of like, what does it mean for people to be safe where they live? What does safety mean? And like trust being an essential part to achieving all of that. So thank you so much for that. I guess like as we close up this interview, you mentioned that you're studying education, and that being driven by a lot of experiences you had with organizing. Um, and I'm curious how you see what you just mentioned with policing, and the visions you articulate abolitionist mission, like visions for the world, right? How kind of that interacts with your current college work, and where you see yourself going forward.
I think for me, choosing education was really me saying that I have a commitment to like give people the education that they deserve in the way that they deserve it. And for me specifically, I chose math because I felt like growing up, I did not have any math teachers who were white men, but also any teachers. I mean, I feel like math is really just, they always say that there's real life applications for it, but they'll just show you like a model of a rocket going up and down. And like, yes, that may be cool, but like there's other things that students want to understand in this world that I think can really be connected to social justice issues, and just looking at history, like statistics, and like seeing the statistics of different things, or and I think that with me carrying organizing, and for me it's like one, teaching students how to advocate for themselves, because that's something that I'm not good at, but I want to make sure that students can do for themselves, because you do need to do that in order to get like the things that you need. But also teaching students that fighting for their communities, because I feel like a lot of people get scared with organizing or activism in general, because they think it's such a political thing. And I mean, it is, but also getting students to know that if you're fighting for your communities, that does not have to be a purely political thing. It's also a personal thing for you too. Everyone has their own personal ties to it, and trying to bring that message to student and make sure that we're taking away the things in schools that make them harmful. But also for me, not only just doing work with students, but trying to work with other people on the school living. And I think for me and my college work right now, I'm actually taking a education class, because we have like different classes, and one of them right now is about I think it's like about race and like understanding race and like classrooms and like intersectionality, which I think could be a great course to teach to teachers, but I feel like the way that's being executed, it's really not in an intentional way, more in a way that really gets white educators to actually think about the implications of being a white teacher in those spaces. So for me, that work really looks like talking to my classmates right now and trying to introduce them to an ideal school that does not involve constant policing of people, but also that really embraces and doesn't just wash over the different identities that people hold. Because like this is just like really small matter, but like we had a project that's supposed to be talking about our self-identities, and it's, for me, what I really looked at was like putting yourself vulnerably and talking about 3 different identities that you hold that was really important to you, and the ways that they influence your practices and the ways that you want to carry them into your classroom. But what really ticked me off was in what ways will this identity hinder you from being a teacher? And for me, that felt like an issue for me, because in one way you could kind of tell that this course is built for white students, because like it was kind of like, come on, I'm like a Latina, like trying to become a teacher. Like, why are you telling me like that my identity would hinder? Like, I tried framing it like in a way, like how does it not show you the full perspective, or like what things could you learn from other people? But we kind of had to share out about it, which I was like, okay, which was really nerve-wracking for me, because I'm one of the like only students who is not white. And I found that a lot of my peers were choosing identities that were mostly like, I was a volleyball captain, or like I was a ballerina. And I felt like those definitely are identities that can hold importance to people and importance and perseverance, but I don't think really look through the lens of like, how does me being a teacher really interact with students if we're really trying to talk about race, equity, and like creating classrooms that are really acknowledging and respecting the students and where they come from, and really serving the students that are in the community. So for me, I think that's something I definitely want to discuss with my professor, because I think for me that was like a huge disappointment. Not that I really expected much, to be honest, where you're at, but like yeah, that's kind of the work that I'm doing right now. But obviously, I still know that I need to learn, and trying to see that weird transition between being someone who was a student to becoming someone who wants to be a teacher and ends up becoming a teacher, and how will that change the relationship that I have with students? Because even though right now I have done like some places where like I have taught other people, it's always been kind of like I'm really close in age to you, and I don't have this official title, and trying to understand how the dynamic will change over time and what I can do to still be a guiding person in someone's life, but not in the way that teaching kind of tells you to be separate from the students, and like to not care for students, that you know to teach, you need to like ignore relationship building in order to like shove content to students' brains.
Yeah. Do you want to teach in Chicago? And also, do you see organizing as something that will be part of your life moving forward?
I definitely want to teach in Chicago, mainly because I was a student in Chicago public schools, and I really can't see myself leaving Rogers Park, if I'm being honest. I mean, I've grown up here, I lived my whole life here, which is something that was really frowned upon by people, because they're like, you need to leave in order to do it. And I could see the value in like leaving somewhere else, but I really wanted to be where my community was at.
Yeah.
And organizing for me, I think for a while in high school, I was like, I'm overwhelmed with this. Like, I need to stop. I can't do this. But I think every single time that I like do that, I find myself coming back to it slowly. So at this point, I've accepted it. I'm going to like organizing abolition is like something that I'm committed to for a lifetime, and will definitely not be afraid to tell other people about, because I don't think abolition is a bad thing. I think it's something that very much all of us want to like achieve and really agree with at the end of it. Like I remember doing a workshop with some people, it was taught by Benji Hart, and they were like talking about abolition and kind of like short thing at the end. We had like a group of 20 students who were like, yes, abolition. And we're like, why don't we have free Wi-Fi? Why don't we have free transportation? Like we could do all of these things if we weren't giving so much money to the police. Like abolition is the answer to all of our needs and the answer to all of us having better lives and being able to care for each other.
Yeah. Who was that workshop taught by?
It was abolition 101. So it was basically talking about the prison industrial complex. And it basically like had like a scenario laid out about someone stealing like a bus card from someone else, and like what did those two people need, and like what realistically does happen. And then talking about like the whole funding of the police in Chicago, and how I think we've hit 3 billion at this point. And talking about how that could be reinvested, and kind of just showing like how much money goes into different things.
Okay. And so was that organized by you guys in Sullivan, or was it with an outside organization?
So that was organized like, and I have been talking about the guest speaker series. So yeah, that speaker came to us through that I guess organization type of like collaboration we had. And that was held at the P.O. Box Collective, which is like a radical art space in the community. And I think that was just like really nice part about living in Rogers Park, because we have so many spaces that are really open to like organizing, but also a lot of people who live in the neighborhood who care about these issues or are really open to listening about these issues.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And it's also amazing that you want to go back and stay in Rogers Park and continue your work as an educator and an organizer too. Just to finish up, like I'm curious what you'd say to current and future Chicago youth organizers who, you know, to this day, Lori Lightfoot just cut the ribbon on the Cop Academy. And there are schools that have SROs and CPS. So thinking about all of that, and there are currently students, you know, all over the city that are agitating and organizing against these things. What would you say to them, and what are your thoughts about these ongoing struggles?
Like, I think I mean, it's really simple, but it's just like keep going. I think that's really what I want to say to them. I don't know if I have much more to say to them, because I feel like so many young people already have the wisdom to kind of guide themselves and like have already built up this resiliency, and like I think it's just to like keep going and know that as long as your heart's in like the right place, like there's no reason why you should feel bad about this work that you're doing or give up about this work that you're doing. But also like try to find some joy, because I feel like sometimes it's really hard. Like, yeah, it's really hard no matter what you do. Like you can't just like put on a smile. But I think I read this and it was like joy is resistance too. And I think finding that joy and being able to express it is a way that we can show that not everything has been stripped away from us or our communities. And also can get some other people mad, because some people get mad and then there's people like enjoying themselves.
Yeah.
And about all of these current issues, I think it's even more of a motivating factor about why we need to get rid of these systems, but also why we need to continue working together. Because as we can see, when you're talking about Lori Lightfoot cutting that ribbon, I mean, everybody just heard about Tortuguita and like what had happened in Atlanta, and that's still happening, and hearing about how like even if these issues happen, like our politicians are never going to care, especially like, so we need to like work harder, not just to change politicians' minds, but like really the minds of the other people, especially with these elections coming up. And I think with all of these events coming, like all of this going on, I think it's really the time where we should like have these conversations with other people and really talk about how all of these things are related, because some people might think that they're unrelated, but also talk about really like where we should like focus sometimes, because the Cop Academy is being built in Garfield Park. And like, who is that going to be impacting? How can we help people? And like, I think it was Kevin Savaro who's like who's organizing the city. I met them one time, and I think they said like we need to build our own resources because you can't trust other people to build them for us. Referring to like the politicians, and I think that's a really important thing to do. Even me, I think that's something that I should have focused on in high school more. Instead of like going to these meetings, which were important, we need to figure out how we as students are going to band together to create community within our own school, because our school has already expressed the fact that they're not invested. So could that have meant taking over the peace room on our own board and trying to like get people trained in holding circles? Maybe. And I think that's something definitely that people are working on in the South Side to do. And I think that's really important, which that needs to be highlighted.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much again, Ruby, for taking the time. I appreciate you sharing all of your experiences and the amazing work that you've been doing. Thank
Thank
you.
you for having me. This has been really nice to do.
Awesome. I'm gonna restart it. Basically, okay, so what are your racial slash ethnic, like what racial slash ethnic identities would you identify with?
Latino.
Okay. And then if you are comfortable sharing, what is your gender identity?
Female.
Okay. And then were you eligible for free and or reduced lunch while growing up? So NCP. Okay. And then what level of education did your parents complete?
Elementary.
Okay. And then what kinds of responsibilities did you have after school?
Cleaning the house and just taking care of the house and making sure I was sick because I'm not gonna go on a tangent about that.
No, you're so good. I feel free to explain if you want to, but
It's just because I was like taking like my 3 older sisters, and then one of my older sisters really took care of me. So my mom worked really long hours, and it was really just us making sure, like it sounds so bad, but like us just making sure that like we were at home, we were fed, we didn't go out, and that we didn't answer the door if someone knocked. And it was really just take care of yourself. And that was really my responsibility. So sometimes couldn't go to after school because mom was like, there's no way you're coming home by yourself after school. One, without your sister being able to pick you up from school, but two, because what if someone sees you come in by yourself and is like DCFS or something? Because my older sister was only like 5 years older than me. So I don't think at the time we were legally allowed to be left alone at home.
okay. Awesome. Well, I'm gonna end the recording real quick.